Thank you. It's quite some pressure to go after Andy because how can I excite you more than telling you you can play God? But I'm not going to give empty promises. I'm going to talk about how we created a multiplayer narrative engine for Whispers in the West. First, a little bit about myself. My name is Yoyu. In the past couple of years, I've been working on Rings 3 Kingdoms. In this game, I was a writer and a narrative designer. And for those who already know Rings, in this one, we introduced quite a few exciting new things, so check it out. And another game I've been working on is Whispers in the West, which I'm going to talk about in this session. But my background is actually in board games. I was a board game publisher some years ago, so hope that explains my passion in multiplayer social games. So before I start, I'm going to show you some numbers. Some numbers I'm sure some of you are very familiar with already. Yeah, that's the reaction I expected. So there are more than 4,000 upcoming adventure games, sorry. Even for upcoming point-and-click games, there are more than 300. So, but if we just apply one more filter, a magic filter, this number can go down to 3. That is multiplayer point-and-click games. Actually, don't tell others I say this. Apart from Whispers in West, other two are escape rooms. So, since we are in a conference about narrative-driven games, I would say the only narrative-driven multiplayer point games is ours. So, how did we come up with this weird idea? So, one of the reasons is, as a team, we really like multiplayer games. And as I said, my background was in board games, so we like social games, that games we can share with friends. We just published a demo in June this year, but that's already enough to put us in the top-selling chart. How does this game work? In short, you can imagine this game as Among Us, but with stories, or Ace Attorney, but online co-op. So in the game, you need to collaborate with other players. The game supports up to 4 players. So each player will play a character. For example, you may be the sheriff, and your friend plays the cowboy. And together, you are going to solve a mystery case, and you need to really work together and collaborate. And each mystery unit can be solved in just an hour, so if this is a game I can guarantee you definitely can finish. I'm going to show you a 30 seconds video of the gameplay, so just to help you understand. So for those of you who couldn't hear the audio, but I guess you guys played enough adventure games to understand what's going on. So that's it. That's a video taken from a real Twitch stream. Can I have a show of hands, like how many of you here regularly watch stuff on Twitch? That's pretty good, actually. Yeah, so I cannot just make up anything for my next slide. So we worked with a couple of dozens of Twitch streamers because of Whispers in the West. What we learned, and feel free to disagree, comparing to YouTube, Twitch is really a social platform. When we think about Twitch streamers, we think about like the ones like really like hundreds of thousands of followings, but actually on Twitch, more than 40% of Twitch streamers, they have fewer than 100 average viewers. What motivates them to stay with the platform is not to make millions, maybe they do, but what motivates them to stay in the platform is the community and the small circle around us, around them. That's why there are some features like squads, teams, raids. They are like all sociable features to encourage players to connect. So for this reason, the majority of most streamed games on Twitch are multiplayer games or have very strong social elements. I only highlighted Dead by Daylight and Phasmophobia because other games need no more introduction, but also because these two games are almost exclusively played with friends. So very often we have streamers play our game, and after the session, because it's only 1 hour, they still have some time to fill. So they either switch to Dead by Daylight or Phasmophobia. So if this talk gives you any inspiration, I think it might be there are really not many games like this, and certainly not for narrative adventure games. And that motivates us to make Whispers in the West as well. So in the rest of the session, I'm going to share what we learned in the process. The first challenge is multiplayer storytelling is nonlinear by nature. Because when you play a multiplayer game, everything, especially a game that you actually have a solid logic, like a murder mystery, everything you sing, everything you do, everyone you talk to, everything you say, they should have an impact on other players' storyline. And there is a lack of tooling for this, at least for indie games. We started making a prototype using Yan Spinner. We still love this tool. This is a great tool. There were just a few things that we found didn't quite work out for us. For example, as the amount of dialogue grows, the visual dialogue tool doesn't really scale for us very well. So this spider-like node is actually our actual work in progress. And even after we switched to scripting part, because as I mentioned, it's non-linear, there are just so many conditions we need to switch between. So our writer didn't particularly enjoy writing those kind of nested if statements. I think he might be here as well today, but I haven't seen him. So we decided to start making our own narrative engine. And what we go for is condition-based switching. So for example, on the right-hand side, this is a node called greetings. And it's triggered when you clicking on the banker. So by default, the banker will say, "Howdy, how can I help you?" But if you are a sheriff, the banker will say, "Oh, it's you, sheriff," instead. And similarly, if you are the outlaw, the banker will say, "You better have a good reason to be here," and so on and so forth. So basically, we call those different sections like variations. Basically, the narrative engine will select the best variation based on the context, based on the game states, current game states. So with this custom narrative engine, we managed to move from if statements to condition-based switching. Again, you can see, I think, at least for me, it looks much cleaner and simpler, and it's much easier to work with. To give you an idea, just before the London Games Festival this year, just 1 week before, we were like, we need to do a demo at the festival. We were saying, "Oh crap, we don't have a tutorial for our game yet." But in a week, we managed to create this 30-minute tutorial from having the ideas to actually having something playable. By the way, I forgot to mention that another idea we Space Invest had at the beginning is also we want to allow players to write their own stories at some point. That's another reason that the narrative engine needs to be really minimalist. And let's move on to the second challenge. Imagine a scenario the NPC tells you, hey, it's you again, but I already gave the murder weapon to your teammate. For those game designers here, I'm sure you already figured out there are a bunch of things going on here. For an NPC to say this, the NPC first needs to know they have spoken to you before. Second, they need to know they have given your teammate has a murder weapon. And third, you and your teammates are different persons. So, which means in this game, we need to track different kinds of states. Not only we need to track the personal states, we also need to track the states of other players as well as the global states. There are actually a lot of thinking and trials and errors going through this very simple slide. But long story short, in the end, we decide to track 3 kinds of states. The first one is the items you have. Here, we actually had to make a trade-off. So currently in the game, we don't differentiate the items you have personally and the items you have collectively as a team. Basically, all players in the team share the same inventory. That is because otherwise the logic just gets too complicated and even players get confused. So we made a trade-off here. But for characters, we actually make a distinction of people you know of and the people you actually spoken to. And similarly, for labels, there are some labels you would acquire in the game that only applies to you. For example, maybe you are the sheriff, you show the badge, and the banker become compliant, and you yourself will acquire the label called compliant banker. But there are other labels that are applicable to all players. For example, if there was a locked door, but now it is opened, and this is a state that every player will share. The last one, I guess it's not hard to imagine. It's a lot more difficult to test the multiplayer game. For the interest of time, I say that, but actually I thought this is a 15-minute session, so we actually have some time maybe in the end. If someone has questions, I'm happy to talk about the practicalities of testing the multiplayer game. But as far as the dialogue engine is concerned, there are a few things I want to share. The first one is test early, test often. Again, I think there's something to do with my background in board games. Because in board games, everything is pen and paper. You really can test everything with just pen and paper. So if my team tells me, okay, this is something we cannot test before building it, I mean, there may be scenarios where this is true, but in most cases, actually, you can always test the game before working 2 months on something. So we actually luckily had a playable prototype just within 1 week after we had the initial idea of doing a multiplayer murder mystery game. How we did it is we had a team of 5 at that time, and 3 of them were playing NPCs, and 2 of us playing players. And we have a Discord server, and we created a bunch of channels. And each channel is basically a room. For example, one channel is the bank, another channel is the sheriff's office, and another channel is the saloon. So myself and another player, he's actually here today as well, we just go around, jump between different channels, and when we arrive at channel, there will be an NPC / our colleague waiting there, and then we just have the dialogue with the NPC. That's our first playtest with ourselves. And within about 1 or 2 months, 1 month, I think, we had this playable prototype on Discord. So this time it's a very similar idea, but just the only difference is we actually have a Discord bot which automatically process like the dialogues. And for example, in the dialogue here, you have 3 options to talk to the miner, or you can go inside the mine. We did this as an external playtest, so the playtesters, they can just type, okay, talk to the miner, and then it's a little bit like a mud game, and there will be just the next part of the text will come up. And technically, we find it's really important to enable the writers to be able to test what they have right in the actual game, and preferably immediately after they write something, or as soon as they want to test something, so they can really iterate fast. Since the scripts for or the stories for the game are in plain texts, so our writers can use any tool they prefer. And after that, they need to upload the texts to GitHub. And this is probably the most technical step in this whole process. And once the scripts are in GitHub, we have a GitHub action which automatically picks up the changes and process the script and convert it into a format that the game actually uses. The benefit of using GitHub is, first, the writers, they don't need to install any special software, and if we make any changes to like how the script should be converted, the GitHub action will just, it has nothing to do with, it's not a concern of the writer. Also, like as it's GitHub, so it's very easy to compare any 2 different versions. And after that, GitHub will automatically upload the scripts the game actually uses to a cloud storage. And from there, next time when the writer or the player opens up the game in Steam, they can just load the updated scripts directly from the game. But obviously, we have a development build for that. If the writer makes any mistakes, for example, there's a little mistake in formatting, the GitHub action will give the writer some feedback as well. Like, for example, you are missing you are missing a column here, and things like this. For multiplayer game, it's so why we want players to be able to play in from Steam directly, because for multiplayer game it's actually very important, because this means they don't need to have a Unity installed, and for some of you the cost of Unity license might be a concern as well. So yeah, so players and writers, they can just test the game directly from Steam. And another thing, it's not something big we want to share, just really want to say Unity test runners are great, and I'm really sometimes quite surprised that not everyone's using it. And in terms of future plans, as I mentioned, The non-term plans is we want to enable players to write their own stories. So if some of you are interested in writing murder mysteries, let me know. And that is my talk. And
thank you very much. We have a few minutes for questions, if you're happy with that.
yeah, sure.
Do we have any questions? A very near question.
Thank you for the talk. Is there a way to adapt this to, let's say, writing? You're already talking about how to do it as a bot for Discord. Is there a way to make this a game that is played as a Discord bot?
Sorry, if I understand the question correctly, you asking if it's possible to use this engine, but just with Discord.
Yeah, that you can. So in the same way that you can play some social deduction games on Discord, can you make this a game that a few friends can play in a Discord channel?
Yeah, that is certainly a direction like we considered before. But I think it's important to mention that although I'm making a talk about the narrative engine, but we don't have this narrative engine packaged as a product yet. It's something currently only used by us internally. But yes, like technically we do kind of like really separate like what is like the logic of the engine and what is the interaction. So it's totally possible to use the same logic with other interfaces.
Did I see another hand there? Excuse me.
Hi, I really enjoyed your talk. I work a lot with Twitch as I work in esports broadcasting education. I was wondering, in terms of Twitch as a social platform for allowing multiplayer storytelling, are there any limitations that you've come across with that particular platform? Are there sort of like specific positives that you find which are specific to Twitch they sort of like enable?
Yeah, so our game is actually currently available on Steam. So I guess your question is probably about like the Twitch integration, like the Twitch extensions. This is something that we heavily discussed like internally within the team. I think this question is probably better answered by another game called King of the Castle. If you had heard of this game, like internally, our conclusion on this was since most Twitch streamers they actually have a relatively small number of followers, it actually doesn't make too much difference for them to have the audience vote in the chat or vote through pushing a button. And I think from what I heard, there is always some delay in the Twitch extension as well. So this is something eventually we decided at least not a priority. Hopefully that answers your question as well.
I think we have time for one more question if there's another hand.
Hello, you mentioned briefly that you created a tutorial experience for this. Obviously tutorials are traditionally of a single player and they can be a bit of a gate or a delay to getting into a gameplay experience. I was wondering how you approach these problems and what your sort of general design ideas were behind your tutorial.
That's a very good question. We actually went back and forth with that one. We initially made the tutorial level the same as the other levels, so more than one player can join this tutorial script. But we found most players actually found this is confusing. This is very difficult to it was a very difficult decision for us because for our game, what differentiates from other games is actually the multiplayer experience. But we hate not being able to show this experience in the tutorial. But at the same time, if we allow more than one player to join the tutorial, because tutorial being a tutorial, you need to make sure every player goes through the step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So players actually found it confusing. So we experimented having like kind of total, like having the tutorial support 1 to 4 players at the beginning, and then we kind of like made a trade-off to make restricted to like up to 2 players, but some players still found it confusing. So eventually, I think one of our developers said he plays a lot of multiplayer games, but he could not think of one game that's multiplayer game and the tutorial is actually can be joined by more than 1 player. If some of you in the audience can think of any examples, yeah, feel free to raise your hand.
Please join me in saying a huge thank you to Yoyu Li.